The freezing water of the Hudson didn't scare her. Losing the little boy sinking into the murky depths did. But when Kane dragged his limp body onto the muddy bank, she didn't realize the hardest part wasn't fighting the current. It was facing the man who arrived seconds later. Adrian Volkov wasn't just a worried father. He was the head of the city's most feared crime syndicate, a man who didn't believe in accidents. Kane thought she was saving a life that day, but the moment she looked into the devil's eyes, she realized she might have just signed her own death warrant. This is the story of how a simple act of kindness sparked a war. The Chicago wind in November had teeth. It bit through the wool of Kane Evans' coat, finding the gaps in her scarf, and making her regret the decision to walk home after a 12-hour shift at St. Jude's Memorial. But the subway was down again, and Kane needed the air. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and bad news. The riverfront at least smelled of rain and wet concrete. Kane adjusted her bag, her fingers numb inside her pockets. She was 26, drowning in student loans and tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. The path along the Chicago River was deserted this late, the iron railings slick with mist. She was passing the old abandoned shipping yards, an area the locals knew to avoid when she heard it. It wasn't a scream. It was a splash, a heavy, unnatural sound that cut through the drone of distant traffic. Kane stopped. She scanned the dark water churning grey and black under the flickering street lamps. "Hello," she called out, her voice snatched away by the wind. Nothing. Just the lapping of waves against the concrete pilings. She turned to keep walking, convincing herself it was just debris, maybe a tire thrown in by teenagers. But then she saw it. A flash of bright red, bobbing 20 yards out. A puffer jacket, and attached to it, a small, pale hand, flailing desperately against the current. Kane didn't think. Her brain, trained by years in the ER, bypassed fear and went straight to protocol. She dropped her bag, kicked off her heavy boots, and vaulted over the railing. The drop was 10 feet. She hit the freezing water like a stone. The shock punched the air from her lungs, turning her blood to ice instantly. The river was a beast, heavy and pulling, dragging at her clothes. She surfaced, gasping, wiping sludge from her eyes. "Help!" The voice was thin, terrified and gurgling. "Keep your head up!" Kane screamed, swimming with choppy, desperate strokes. The current here was vicious, an undertow created by the bridge pilings. She reached the red jacket just as the boy went under again. He was small, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Kane dove, her eyes stinging in the murky blackness. Her hand brushed nylon. She gripped it tight and kicked upward, breaking the surface with the boy in her arms. He was dead weight, panicked and thrashing. "Stop! I've got you!" she yelled, spitting out river water. She hooked her arm under his chin, flipping him onto his back to keep his airway clear. "I've got you." The swim back was torture. Her limbs felt like lead. Every kick was a battle against the freezing cold that was already making her vision tunnel. She aimed for a rusted maintenance ladder, clinging to the mossy wall of the embankment. She threw the boy toward the ladder. "Grab it!" The boy, shivering violently, his lips blue, managed to loop an arm through the rung. Kane shoved him up her strength, failing. She scrambled up behind him, her fingernails tearing against the rusted iron until they both collapsed onto the concrete walkway. Kane rolled onto her back, wheezing, staring up at the smog-choked sky. She was freezing. Hypothermia was minutes away. She forced herself to sit up. The boy was curled in the ball, coughing up water. "Hey!" Kane chattered, her teeth clacking together painfully. She crawled over to him, checking his pulse. It was erratic. What's your name?" "Leo," he whispered, his eyes wood and dark, terrified not just of the water but of something else. He looked around wildly. "My dad. He'll be so mad." "No," Kane said, rubbing his arms vigorously to generate heat. "He'll be glad you're alive. We need to get you to a hospital." She reached for her phone in her coat pocket, only to realize her coat was back on the upper path, along with her bag. She was soaked, freezing, and phoneless in the worst part of town. "Okay, Leo. We have to walk. We have to keep moving." Before she could stand, the sound of tires screeching on asphalt echoed off the warehouse walls. It sounded like an explosion. 3 massive black SUVs, matte finish tinted windows, roared onto the pedestrian path, ignoring the bollards. They skidded to a halt in a V formation, blocking Kane and Leo against the river railing. Kane instinctively pulled Leo behind her. "Stay back," she warned, though she had no weapon, only her shivering body. The doors flew open. Men poured out. They didn't look like police. They didn't look like paramedics. They wore bespoke charcoal suits that cost more than Kane's annual salary, and the way they moved, efficient, silent, lethal, screamed military training. And in their hands were guns. Compact, suppressed submachine guns leveled directly at Kane's chest. "On the ground! Now!" one of them barked. "He's a child!" Kane screamed, shielding Leo. "He's freezing! Put the guns down!" The circle of men parted. A man stepped out from the lead SUV. He was tall, over 6'3", wearing a long black trench coat over a suit. He didn't have a gun drawn. He didn't need one. He radiated a terrifying, cold power that made the armed men look like children. His hair was dark, slicked back from a face that was devastatingly handsome, but hard as granite. His eyes were the color of steel, and right now they were burning with a rage that could scorch the earth. He looked at Leo. Then he looked at Kane. He walked forward, the guards shifting to let him pass. He stopped 2 feet from Kane. "Daddy!" Leo sobbed, breaking from Kane's grip and running to the man. The man caught the boy, falling to one knee to wrap him in the trench coat, burying his face in the boy's wet neck for a split second. It was a moment of raw humanity. Then the man stood up, Leo safe in his arms. He looked at Kane. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, accented with something Slavic, and utterly devoid of gratitude. "I'm the one who just pulled your son out of the river." Kane snapped, adrenaline overriding her fear. "He has mild hypothermia. He needs a hospital, not an interrogation." The man stared at her. He noticed her wet scrubs, her shivering hands, the blue tint of her lips. He signaled to the guard on his left, a massive man with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Silas," the man said quietly. "Get Leo in the car. Crank the heat. Call Dr. Aris. Now." "Yes, Pachan," Silas said, taking the boy gently. Kane froze. Pachan. She knew that word. She worked in a trauma center in Chicago. She treated gunshot victims and gang members. Pahan was the title for a boss in the Russian mafia. She took a step back, her back hitting the railing. I should go." The man stepped into her space, blocking her exit. He didn't touch her, but his presence was suffocating. "You aren't going anywhere," he said. "I saved him," Kane whispered. "Or," the man said, tilting his head, his eyes scanning her face like he was reading a dossier. "You threw him in so you could play the hero." Kane's jaw dropped. "Are you insane?" "I almost drowned." "Silas," the man called out without looking away from Kane. Take her. Bring her to the estate. Wait. No. Kane shouted, backing away. 2 guards grabbed her arms. You can't do this. This is kidnapping. The man turned his back on her, walking toward the lead SUV. It's not kidnapping, miss. He paused, waiting for a name. Evans, she spat, struggling against the guards. Kane Evans. It's not kidnapping, Miss Evans, Adrian Volkov said, opening the car door. It's an investigation, and if I find out you had anything to do with my son falling into that water, you'll wish you had drowned with him. The drive was silent. Kane sat in the middle seat of the second SUV, sandwiched between 2 stone-faced guards. The leather interior smelled of expensive cologne and gun oil. The heating was on full blast, which stopped her violent shivering, but the fear kept her heart hammering against her ribs. They didn't take her to a police station. They drove north out of the city toward the Gold Coast Bluffs, where the old money lived. They passed wrought-iron gates and winding driveways until they stopped before a fortress. The Volkov estate was less a house and more a modern castle. High concrete walls topped with cameras and sensors surrounded a sprawling mansion of glass and black stone. It looked impenetrable. The car stopped. The door opened. Out, the guard said. Kane stepped out, her wet scrubs clinging to her skin. She felt small, exposed, and ridiculous. She was a nurse who saved lives, and now she was being treated like a criminal by a man who looked like he owned half the city. They marched her into the foyer. It was cavernous with marble floors that reflected the crystal chandelier overhead. Adrian Volkov was already there, shedding his wet trench coat. He was in a 3-piece suit, now looking immaculate despite the chaos at the river. He was speaking rapidly in Russian to an older man, carrying a medical bag, Dr. Aris, presumably. Adrian turned as Kane was brought in. Check her, Adrian commanded the doctor. I don't need a checkup, Kane said, crossing her arms. I need to go home. Check her, Adrian repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. If she dies of pneumonia in my hallway, it's a mess I don't want to clean up. Dr. Aris approached her kindly. Please, miss, just a quick check. Lungs and heart. Kane relented, mostly because she did feel light-headed. The doctor listened to her chest, checked her pupils, and took her temperature. She is borderline hypothermic, Dr. Aris told Adrian. She needs a hot shower, dry clothes, and rest, immediately. Adrian nodded once. He looked at an older woman, the housekeeper, who was hovering nervously by the stairs. Martha, take her to the blue guest room. Get her clothes. Lock the door from the outside. You can't keep me here. Kane stepped forward, her anger flaring again. I have a job. I have a life. You can't just lock me up because you're paranoid. Adrian walked over to her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of rain and sandalwood. He towered over her, but Kane refused to shrink back. She lifted her chin, meeting his steel gaze. My son, Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous, is the only thing in this world that matters to me. He is an excellent swimmer. He does not fall into rivers. Until I know how he ended up in the water, nobody involved leaves my sight. Not you. Not his bodyguards. Nobody. I was walking home, Kane insisted. We verified your route, Adrian said calmly. St. Jude's to the river path. It matches. But coincidence is the lazy man's explanation for a conspiracy. Until Leo wakes up and tells me what happened, you are my guest. Guest? Kane scoffed. You said lock the door. A guest under high security, Adrian corrected. He leaned in closer. Do not try to leave, Kane. The perimeter is electrified, and my men shoot first. Go upstairs. Warm up. Pray my son clears your name. He turned and walked away toward the east wing of the house. Kane watched him go, a mix of fury and terror swirling in her gut. He was a monster. A beautiful, rich, terrifying monster. Martha touched her arm gently. Come, dear. You're turning blue. Kane followed the housekeeper up the grand staircase. As she reached the landing, she looked down. Adrian was standing by the window, staring out into the dark night, his hand gripping a tumbler of amber liquid, so hard she thought the glass might shatter. He looked like a king under siege. The cell was nicer than Kane's entire apartment. The blue guest room had a king-sized bed, a private balcony, and a bathroom filled with marble and gold fixtures. After a scalding shower that finally drove the chill from her bones, Kane put on the clothes Martha had left, a pair of grey cashmere sweatpants and an oversized silk shirt. They were men's clothes. His clothes, she realized with a flush. They smelled like him sandalwood and something crisp, like expensive paper. She paced the room for an hour. She tried the door. Locked just as promised. She checked the balcony. It was on the 3rd floor, a straight drop down to a patio patrolled by 2 guards with Rottweilers. Escape was impossible. Around 10:00 p.m., the lock clicked. Kane spun around, grabbing a heavy brass lamp from the bedside table. The door opened. It wasn't a guard. It was Adrian. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle and marked with faint, faded scars. He held a tray with a bowl of soup and a bottle of water. He saw the lamp in her hand and raised an eyebrow. Going to bludgeon your host, my captor, Kane corrected, lowering the lamp, but not letting go of it. Adrian set the tray on the table. Eat. Martha made borscht. It will help with the cold. I'm not hungry. Eat, he ordered. He sat in the armchair in the corner, crossing his long legs. Leo is awake. Kane's grip on the lamp loosened. Is he okay? His lungs? He's fine. Dr. Aris says you did excellent CPR. You saved his brain from oxygen deprivation. Good, Kane said, breathing a sigh of relief. So he told you. He told you I just found him. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched heavy and thick. He said he was pushed, Adrian said. Kane froze. Pushed. By a woman, Adrian said softly. A woman in a grey coat. Kane looked down at her own coat, hanging on the rack by the door. It was grey wool. No, Kane whispered. No. I was wearing that coat, yes, but I didn't push him. I jumped in after him. Leo said he was walking by the railing, waiting for his detail to catch up. He had run ahead. He felt hands on his back. He turned and saw a woman in grey. Then he went over. Adrian stood up slowly. The security footage from the warehouse is grainy. It shows a figure in grey running towards the boy. Then the boy falls. Then the figure jumps in. I was running to help him, Kane shouted, panic rising in her chest. He was already falling when I started running. Or, Adrian said, walking toward her, you pushed him, regretted it, or realized you were being watched and dove in to fix your mistake. Or maybe it was a botched kidnapping attempt. Why would I kidnap a child and then drown myself trying to save him? Kane argued, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. I'm a nurse. I save people. Check my background. I have 0 criminal record. I have student loans and a court named Miso. I am not an assassin. Adrian stopped right in front of her. He took the lamp from her hand and set it down gently. Then he took her chin in his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch wasn't painful. It was examining. "I have checked you, Kane Evans," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "Born in Ohio. Father was a mechanic, mother a teacher. Both deceased, nursing degree from UIC. Top of your class. You have 42,000 in debt. You work overtime every week. So you know I'm normal." She breathed, her heart racing at his proximity. "I know that everyone has a price," Adrian said, "and I know that my enemies, the Calabrese family, the Triads, they would pay your debt 10 times over, just to hurt my son." He let go of her chin. "But Leo is confused. He is traumatized. His memory is foggy. He remembers the grey coat, but he doesn't remember the face." "I didn't do it," Kane said firmly. "I want to believe you," Adrian said, and for a second he looked tired. "Because if you did save him, I owe you a debt I can never repay. But if you hurt him—" He didn't finish the sentence. He walked to the door. "You stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will go back to the river. We will retrace your steps, and if your story has even one hole in it," he opened the door. "Sleep well, Miss Evans." The lock clicked shut again. Kane sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. She was a prisoner in a golden cage, accused of trying to kill the boy she had risked her life to save. But as she lay in the dark trying to sleep, she couldn't get the image of Adrian Volkov out of her head. The violence in his eyes when he looked at his enemies, and the desperate, terrifying love when he looked at his son. She knew one thing for sure: Adrian Volkov was a dangerous man to have as an enemy. But as she touched the silk of his shirt she was wearing, she wondered what it would be like to have him on her side. And somewhere in the dark house, a phone rang. Adrian picked it up in his office. "Volkov," he answered. "It's done," a distorted voice said on the other end. "The boy is alive." A pity. The nurse was supposed to be the perfect scapegoat. Why didn't you put a bullet in her yet? Adrian's grip tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. His eyes shot to the ceiling toward the room where Kane was sleeping. "Who is this?" Adrian demanded. "A friend," the voice sneered. "Get rid of the girl, Adrian, or we'll finish the job on the boy, and this time she won't be there to fish him out." The line went dead. Adrian stared at the phone. The grey coat. The push. The recul, someone had set Kane up. He looked at the security monitors. On screen 4 he saw Kane curled up on the bed, looking small and defenseless. She wasn't the assassin. She was the target. And now she was the only witness. Adrian holstered his gun. He wasn't keeping her prisoner anymore. He was keeping her alive. The silence in the Volkov estate was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums. In the blue guest room, Kane was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The adrenaline from the river had faded, leaving behind a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She replayed the events in her mind. The boy's face, the freezing water, Adrian's steel-grey eyes accusing her of murder. A woman in a grey coat. It was insane. It was a setup. But who would set up a random nurse? Suddenly the handle of her bedroom door turned. Kane sat up, her heart hammering. It was slow, deliberate. The lock clicked. "Adrian," she whispered, clutching the duvet. The door eased open, but the figure silhouetted by the hallway light wasn't Adrian. It was Silas, the massive guard with the scar, who had driven the car. But something was wrong. He wasn't moving with the stiff formality of a bodyguard. He was creeping a suppressed pistol raised in his right hand. Kane's breath hitched. She scrambled backward, knocking the brass lamp off the table. Clang Silas didn't flinch. He raised the gun, aiming directly at her head. "Sorry, sweetheart." He grunted, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Loose ends." Kane squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the flash. Bang! The sound was deafening, but it didn't come from Silas's gun. The door behind Silas splintered as it was kicked open with tremendous force. Adrian Volkov was there, a blur of fury in a white dress shirt. Before Silas could pull the trigger, Adrian lunged, wrapping his arm around the giant man's throat and slamming him into the doorframe. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding under the bed. "You turned!" Adrian roared, the sound primal. He drove a knee into Silas's kidney, hearing the crunch of bone. "On my son. On my house." Silas was huge, but Adrian fought like a man possessed. He twisted Silas's arm with a sickening crack, disarming him completely, then threw him to the ground. Adrian stood over him, his chest heaving, a black pistol in his own hand, now pointed at his former head of security. "Who paid you?" Adrian demanded, his voice trembling with rage. "Was it the Calabrese?" Silas spat blood onto the pristine carpet. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "It doesn't matter, Volkov. The house is compromised. You're already dead." Adrian didn't hesitate. He pistol-whipped Silas, knocking him unconscious instantly. He turned to Kane. His eyes were wide, wild. There was blood on his knuckles. Silas's blood. "Get up!" Adrian barked. Kane was paralyzed, shaking violently. He was going to kill you to close the loop," Adrian said, moving to the bed and ripping the duvet off her. "Get up, Kane! We have to move! Now!" He grabbed her hand. His grip was iron tight, but his palm was warm. He pulled her off the bed, barefoot, into the hallway. "Where are we going?" Kane gasped, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "The panic room is compromised if Silas had the codes," Adrian said, scanning the corridor. The red emergency lights were flashing now. An alarm wailed in the distance. "We're leaving the estate." "What about Leo?" Kane screamed, digging her heels in. "I'm not leaving without the boy." Adrian stopped. He looked back at her, and for the first time the mask of the ruthless Mafia Don slipped. He looked terrified. "Leo is already in the armored transport with Martha and my brother Dante. They left 10 minutes ago via the tunnel. I stayed back to get you." Kane stared at him. "You stayed? For me?" "You're the witness," Adrian said, his face hardening again, hiding the vulnerability. "And I don't let innocent people die in my house. Now move." They ran down the back servants' staircase. The house was in chaos. Kane could hear shouting, the sound of boots on marble, and the distinct pop-pop-pop of gunfire from the front entrance. The friend on the phone hadn't just made a threat. They had sent a hit squad. They burst out of the kitchen door into the garage. It was a massive concrete bunker filled with exotic cars. Adrian bypassed the Ferraris and Lamborghinis and ran to a nondescript beat-up Ford sedan in the corner. "Get in," he ordered. "Stay low." Kane dove into the passenger seat. Adrian vaulted into the driver's side, hot-wiring the car with a keypad under the dashboard. The engine roared to life. It sounded like a jet engine disguised inside a sedan. As the garage door rolled up, 3 men in tactical gear appeared at the end of the driveway. They raised assault rifles. "Get down!" Adrian shouted, his hand flying out to push Kane's head toward her knees. The windshield shattered as bullets sprayed the car. Kane screamed, covering her head with her arms. Adrian didn't flinch. He slammed the car into reverse, spinning the wheel with one hand, while firing his pistol out the broken window with the other. He hit the gas. The Ford surged forward, clipping one of the attackers and smashing through the wrought iron side gate. They careened onto the dark country road, tires smoking. Adrian drove like a madman, taking corners at 80 miles per hour, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. Kane sat up slowly, brushing glass from her hair. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. She looked at Adrian. His face was bleeding from a shallow cut on his cheek where the glass had grazed him. He looked focused, lethal, and terrifyingly calm. "Are you hit?" he asked, not looking at her. "No," Kane said, her voice shaking. Just a scratch." He reached into the center console, pulled out a burner phone, and dialed a number. "Dante," Adrian said. "Status." A pause. "Good. Keep Leo moving. Do not go to the safe house in the city. Go to the cabin in Wisconsin. The secure one. No electronics. I'll meet you there in 2 days." He hung up and crushed the phone in his hand, tossing the pieces out the window. "Why 2 days?" Kane asked quietly. "Why aren't we going with them?" Adrian glanced at her. The dashboard lights cast deep shadows over his sharp features. "Because they are hunting us, Kane. They think you're the assassin who failed, and they know I'm the one protecting you. If we go to Leo, we lead the wolves right to the sheep." He downshifted, speeding up as they hit the highway. "We're going to be the bait," he said grimly, "and God help anyone who takes it." They drove for 4 hours. The city lights of Chicago faded into the endless black of rural Illinois, then into the dense woodlands near the border. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving Kane exhausted and aching. She watched the trees blur past, feeling like she had fallen into a movie she couldn't pause. Adrian barely spoke. He was constantly scanning the road, taking random exits, and doubling back to ensure they weren't being followed. Finally, just as the sun began to bleed grey light over the horizon, Adrian turned onto a gravel track hidden by overgrown pines. They drove deep into the woods until a small, rough-hewn timber cabin appeared. It looked abandoned. No lights, no car in the driveway. "Is this it?" Kane asked. "One of my father's old hunting blinds," Adrian said, killing the engine. "Not on any deed, not on any digital map. No electricity, no cell service. We're ghosts here." They got out. The air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Adrian opened the trunk and pulled out a duffel bag and a first aid kit. "Inside," he said. The interior was sparse, a stone fireplace, a leather couch that had seen better days, and a small kitchenette. It was cold, the air inside stagnant. Adrian immediately went to the fireplace, stacking logs with efficient movements. Within minutes, a fire was crackling, casting a warm orange glow over the room. "Sit." Adrian gestured to the couch. He opened the first aid kit. "Let me look at your hands." Kane looked down. Her palms were raw and scraped from the rusted ladder at the river, and she had cut her arm on the car glass. She hadn't even felt the pain until now. She sat. Adrian kneeled in front of her. For a man who made his living with violence, his hands were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned her wounds with antiseptic. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Kane looked at the top of his dark head. "For what, kidnapping me? Or almost getting me shot?" Adrian looked up. His eyes were tired. "For all of it. You were right. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And now my world has infected yours." "Who is doing this, Adrian?" Kane asked, using his first name for the first time without venom. Who hates you enough to kill your son?" Adrian finished bandaging her hand and sat back on his heels, staring into the fire. "The Calabresi family is our rival in the city, but this feels personal. Silas was my head of security for 6 years. He watched Leo grow up. To turn him takes more than money. It takes leverage. Or hate." He stood up and paced the small room. "The woman in the grey coat, the one Leo saw, it wasn't you." "I know that," Kane said dryly. "I mean, it was meant to look like you. Same height, same hair color. They scouted you, Kane. They knew your route. They waited for you to be near the river, then they pushed Leo. If you hadn't jumped in, you would have just been a witness. But because you jumped in, because you saved him." "I ruined the plan," Kane realized. "They wanted him to drown, and they wanted to blame the negligence on, well, nobody. Just an accident. But if I saved him, I could testify that he was pushed." "Exactly," Adrian said. "Adrian, you're the glitch in the matrix." He walked over to the window, peering out through the cracks in the shutters. "There is something else," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Leo's mother." Kane watched him. I assumed she wasn't around." "She died 4 years ago," Adrian said. "Car accident, or so we thought." But the voice on the phone, the one who called the house, used a phrase she used to say. Kane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. What phrase? A pity. Adrian's jaw tightened. She always said that, before she did something cruel. "A pity you have to learn this lesson, Adrian." He turned to Kane, his expression haunted. If this is coming from the past, from her family, then nobody is safe. Not even Leo. He looked at Kane, shivering on the couch in his oversized shirt. He walked over, took off his suit jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was comforting. "You need to sleep," he said. "I'll take the first watch." "There's only one couch," Kane pointed out. "I'll sit by the door," Adrian said, pulling a wooden chair against the entrance and checking the magazine of his pistol. Kane lay down, pulling the jacket tight. She watched him sitting there, a silent sentinel in the flickering firelight. He was a criminal, a killer. But in this cabin with the world hunting them down, he was the only thing standing between her and death. "Adrian," she whispered. "Go to sleep, Kane." "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming back for me." He didn't answer for a long time. Just as she was drifting off, she heard his voice, rough and low. "I don't leave my debts unpaid." The morning came with the storm. Rain lashed against the roof of the cabin, drumming a relentless rhythm. Kane woke up alone on the couch. Panic flared for a second until the door opened and Adrian walked in, soaking wet, carrying a bundle of firewood. "Storm brought down a tree on the access road," he said, shaking water from his hair. "We're stuck here until it clears, or until I can move the trunk." He looked different in the daylight. The stubble on his jaw was darker, making him look rugged and dangerous. He had discarded the dress shirt and was wearing a black t-shirt he must have found in the duffel bag. It clung to his chest, emphasizing the sheer power of his build. Kane sat up, conscious of her messy hair. "Is that bad being stuck?" "It's good," Adrian said, dumping the wood by the fire. "Mud covers tracks. The rain grounds drones. We have time." He moved to the kitchenette and opened a can of beans with a combat knife. "Breakfast of champions." They ate in silence, the tension from the night before shifting into something else. Something thicker. Every time their hands brushed passing the food, Kane felt a jolt of electricity. "So, Kane said, trying to distract herself. Tell me about Leo. What is he like when he isn't drowning? A small, genuine smile touched Adrian's lips. It transformed his face, taking 10 years off his age. He is energetic. He loves dinosaurs. He thinks he is a T-Rex half the time. He plays the violin badly. And he hates math. Sounds like a normal kid. Kane smiled. He is not normal. Adrian said, his smile fading. He is a Volkov. He has a target on his back from the day he was born. I tried to keep him out of this life. Private schools, nannies. But the life, it always finds a way in. He looked at Kane intensely. You are normal, Kane. You have a soul. You worry about rent. You save lives instead of taking them. You should hate me for dragging you into this. I don't hate you, Kane said, surprising herself. I hate the situation. But I saw how you looked at him at the river. You love him more than anything. I would burn the world for him, Adrian said simply. He stood up and walked over to her. The cabin was small, forcing them into each other's space. He stopped inches from her. And now, he whispered, his eyes dropping to her lips. I find myself wondering how much of the world I would burn for the woman who saved him. Kane's breath hitched. The air between them crackled. The danger outside felt 1,000,000 miles away. All that existed was the firelight, the rain, and the heat radiating from Adrian Volkov. He reached out his hand, grazing her cheek. You are too good for this world, Kane. Maybe, she whispered, leaning into his touch. Or maybe the world is just too bad. He leaned in his eyes, searching hers for permission. Kane didn't pull away. She tilted her head up. His lips brushed hers, tentative at first, a question. Then as she sighed against him, the kiss deepened. It was hungry, desperate, fueled by the fear of death and the sudden, overwhelming connection between two people from opposite sides of the track. Adrian's arms went around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Kane's hands tangled in his wet hair. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and danger. Suddenly a loud crack echoed from outside. Not thunder, a twig snapping. Adrian broke the kiss instantly, his eyes shifting from passion to predator in a nanosecond. He pushed Kane behind him, drawing his gun. "Get down!" he hissed. He moved to the window. Through the rain, he saw movement in the tree line. A flash of tactical gear. "They found us," Adrian cursed. "How did they find us?" He looked at Kane, then at the bandage on her arm. He grabbed her arm, ripping the bandage off. Underneath the gauze, stuck to her skin, was a tiny pulsing microchip, the size of a grain of rice. Adrian stared at it, his face pale. "Dr. Aris," he whispered. "The doctor put a tracker in you when he checked you at the house." Kane looked at the chip in horror. "The doctor... But he seemed so nice." "Trust no one," Adrian said, his voice ice cold. A bullet smashed through the window, embedding itself in the log wall inches from Adrian's head. "Into the bathroom," Adrian yelled, grabbing her. "Tub now!" The cabin erupted in gunfire. The bathroom of the hunting cabin was small, smelling of mildew and old pine soap. Kane huddled in the cast-iron bathtub, her knees pulled to her chest as bullets tore through the rest of the cabin. The sound was deafening wood, splintering glass, shattering, and the thwack, thwack, thwack of suppressed rounds hitting the logs. Adrian was crouched by the doorframe, checking his weapon, a Sig Sauer P320 he'd pulled from the duffel bag. He looked calm, terrifyingly so. He turned to Kane, his eyes locking onto hers. "They are suppressing the front. "They want to flush us out the back," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "There are at least 6 of them." He reached into his boot and pulled out a backup knife, a jagged piece of dark steel. He handed it to her. "If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you put this in their neck. Do you understand?" Kane took the knife. Her hands were shaking, but she nodded. "Yes." "Good girl." Adrian grabbed the discarded bandage with the microchip still stuck to it. He looked at the window above the toilet, a small ventilation square. "They are tracking this," he said. He reached up and wedged the chip into the frame of the window. "Let's give them a target." He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from the rack, threw it over his head to break his silhouette, and kicked open the bathroom door. "Stay down!" he yelled at Kane. He sprinted not toward the back door, but straight at the front of the cabin, directly into the line of fire. He flipped the heavy oak table onto its side for cover, just as the front windows disintegrated under a hail of gunfire. Kane covered her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. She heard Adrian return fire, the loud crack of his unsuppressed pistol, booming like thunder compared to the enemy's weapons. Then silence. "Reloading," a voice shouted from outside. That was the mistake. Adrian vaulted over the table. He didn't shoot. He ran through the shattered front door, diving onto the wet porch. Kane heard a scream, then a wet thud, then another shot. She couldn't stay in the tub. If he died, she was dead too. Driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she crawled out of the bathroom and peered through the wreckage of the living room. Outside, the storm was raging. Through the sheets of grey rain, she saw Adrian fighting. He was a blur of violence. He had engaged 2 men in hand-to-hand combat in the mud. He twisted one man's rifle away, using the stock to shatter the attacker's jaw, then spun and put 2 rounds into the chest of the second man. But a third man emerged from the tree line, raising a shotgun. Adrian was occupied, his back turned. "Adrian!" Kane screamed. The warning gave him a split second. He dropped to his knees as the shotgun blast decimated the porch railing where he had been standing. Adrian rolled firing from the ground. The gunman dropped, but they weren't done. "Burn it!" someone yelled from the woods. A Molotov cocktail arced through the air, crashing onto the cabin's roof. The old, dry timber caught fire instantly, despite the rain. Smoke began to pour into the room. "Kane, move!" Adrian roared, rushing back inside. He grabbed her arm, hauling her up. "Out the back, now!" They sprinted through the kitchen, bursting out the back door, just as the roof began to collapse. The heat was searing. They ran into the dense tree line, slipping on the muddy slope. Behind them, the cabin became a bonfire, illuminating the woods in an eerie orange glow. "They'll see us," Kane gasped, her lungs burning. "No," Adrian said, pulling her into a ravine filled with ferns. "The fire destroys the heat signature for their thermal scopes. It blinds them." They slid down the ravine landing in a creek bed with freezing water up to their shins. Adrian didn't stop. He dragged her upstream under the cover of the overhanging bank. They moved for 20 minutes in silence, the only sound the rain and their ragged breathing. Finally, Adrian stopped under a concrete bridge that passed over the creek. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the mud. "Adrian!" Kane knelt beside him. He was clutching his side. Dark blood was seeping through his black t-shirt, mixing with the rain. "You're shot," Kane whispered, horror washing over her. "Ricochet." Adrian gritted out, his face pale. "Fragment. In the ribs." "Let me see." Kane went into nurse mode. She lifted his shirt. It was a jagged tear, bleeding heavily, but it hadn't hit a lung. I need to apply pressure. We need to stop the bleeding. No time, Adrian wheezed. They will circle back. We need a car. We are miles from anywhere. The main road, 2 miles east. Adrian pointed. There's a gas station, an old one. You can't walk 2 miles. Adrian grabbed her hand. His grip was weaker than before, but his eyes were still burning with that intense steel fire. Kane, listen to me. If I pass out, you leave me. You run to the road. You flag down a car. You go to the police, not the local ones, the state troopers. Shut up, Kane said, tearing a strip off the bottom of her shirt. She wadded it up and pressed it hard against his wound. Adrian groaned, his head tipping back against the concrete. I am not leaving you, Kane said fiercely. You came back for me. I'm not leaving you in a ditch. She grabbed his arm and draped it over her shoulders. Stand up, Volkov. You're heavy, so help me out. Adrian looked at her, a mixture of shock and admiration in his eyes. He gritted his teeth and pushed himself up. They stumbled through the woods together, a nurse and a mafia don, bound by blood and the refusal to die. By the time they reached the tree line near the gas station, Adrian was barely conscious. The station was a small, run-down place with a single attendant dozing inside. A rusty pickup truck was pumping horse at the lone island. Stay here, Kane whispered, propping Adrian against a tree. Kane, I've got this, she said. She walked out of the woods. She looked like a nightmare, covered in mud, blood, and soaking wet. The driver of the pickup, an older man in flannel, stared as she approached. Miss, you okay? Is there an accident? Please? Kane said, her voice trembling. My husband. We crashed our car. He's hurt bad. We need a ride to the hospital. The man hesitated, looking at her wild eyes. I'll call 911. No service, Kane lied desperately. Please, just help us. The man nodded slowly. Okay, bring him out. Kane ran back to the tree. Adrian, wake up. We have a ride. They managed to get Adrian into the back seat of the extended cab. The old man drove fast, heading toward the nearest town. In the back seat, Kane held Adrian's head in her lap. His skin was clammy. Kane, he whispered, his eyes fluttering. I'm here. The traitor, he mumbled. It wasn't just Dr. Aris. It was the smell. The smell. Cigar smoke. And lavender, Adrian murmured, drifting into unconsciousness. My stepmother's perfume. Kane froze. His stepmother. The truck sped on through the rain, carrying them toward uncertain safety, while Kane realized the web of betrayal was far closer to home than anyone had guessed. 3 days later, the private wing of St. Jude's Memorial was on lockdown. Not officially, but effectively. Men in suits stood at every elevator and stairwell. Inside the VIP suite, Adrian Volkov sat on the edge of the bed. He was shirtless, a fresh white bandage wrapped around his ribs. He was healing, his constitution was unnatural, but his face was grim. Dante, his brother, stood by the window. Leo was safe at the secure estate in the Hamptons. We found Dr. Aris, Dante said quietly. He was trying to board a flight to the Caymans. He talked before he expired. And, Adrian asked, buttoning a fresh dress shirt. He was blackmailed. Someone held his granddaughter. But the order came from the top. It was Helena. Adrian paused, his fingers stilling on the buttons. Helena, my father's widow. She wanted the seat, Dante said. With you and Leo gone, the Volkov Empire falls to her by default. Adrian finished buttoning his shirt. He put on his jacket. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed and lethal. Where is she? At the penthouse, waiting for news of your death. Adrian nodded. He walked to the door, then stopped. He turned to the connecting room. Kane was there. She was dressed in clean clothes, jeans, and a sweater Dante had brought her. She looked tired, but the fear was gone from her eyes. It had been replaced by a hardened resolve. "You're leaving," she stated. "I have to end it," Adrian said. "Tonight." "And then what?" Kane asked. "Do I go back to my life, to my cat and my student loans?" Adrian walked over to her. He didn't care that Dante was watching. He took her face in his hands. "You can," he said softly. "I will clear your debt. I will buy you a house anywhere in the world. You will never see me again." Kane looked at him. She thought about the river, the cabin, the way he had shielded her body with his own. She thought about the boring, safe life she had before, and how cold it felt compared to the fire of the last 3 days. "And if I don't want that?" she whispered. Adrian's thumb brushed her lower lip. "Kane, my life is blood and bullets. You saw that. You almost died." "I saved you," she reminded him. "And you saved me." "It's a war, Kane." "Then you'll need a medic," she said, her voice steady. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, searching for doubt. He found none. He leaned down and kissed her hard, possessive, a promise and a warning all in one. "Stay here with Dante," he ordered. "When I come back, we will talk about the future." The penthouse. Helena Volkov was sipping champagne, looking out at the Chicago skyline. She was a beautiful woman in her 50s, elegant and venomous. The elevator doors pinged. She smiled, expecting her hitman. She turned. The glass fell from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. Adrian walked in. He was alone. He held no weapon in his hand. He didn't need one. "Adrian," she stammered, backing away. I heard there was an accident." "An accident," Adrian repeated, stepping over the shattered glass. "Like Leo falling in the river, like the ambush at the cabin." "I don't know what you're talking about." Adrian stopped in front of her. The room smelled of expensive cigars and lavender. "You wanted the throne, Helena. You didn't care if you had to kill a 7-year-old boy to get it." "He's not even a pureblood," Helena shrieked, her mask slipping. "He's weak like his mother. The Empire needs strength." "The Empire needs loyalty," Adrian said coldly. "And family." He turned his back on her. Helena's eyes darted to her purse on the table. A small pistol was inside. She lunged for it. Adrian didn't turn around. 2 shots rang out from the balcony shadows. Helena crumpled to the floor. Dante stepped out from the curtains, his smoking gun lowered. He had arrived before Adrian securing the room. "She never learned," Dante said, holstering his weapon. "Clean this up," Adrian said, walking toward the elevator without looking back at the body. "I have somewhere to be." Epilogue. 6 months later. The charity gala at the Chicago Art Institute was the event of the season. The press was there in droves, flashing cameras at the city's elite. A black limousine pulled up. The crowd hushed. Adrian Volkov stepped out. He looked every inch, the king of the city tuxedo sharp, dangerous. He reached a hand back into the car. Kane emerged. She was stunning in an emerald green gown that hugged her curves. She wore diamonds at her throat, a gift from Adrian. But more importantly, she wore a confidence that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She took Adrian's arm. "Ready?" he asked quietly, leaning close to her ear. "Ready," she smiled. They walked up the red carpet together. The flashbulbs popped blinding white light. A reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Mr. Volkov, who is the mystery woman? Is it true she's a former nurse?" Adrian stopped. He looked at the reporter, then down at Kane. He pulled her closer, his arm protective around her waist. "She is not a mystery," Adrian said, his voice deep and carrying over the crowd. "She is the woman who saved my son, and she is the only person in this city I trust with my life." He looked at Kane, and for a second the cameras didn't exist. "She is the queen," he whispered to her. Kane squeezed his hand. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was ruling. They turned and walked into the gala, leaving the world to wonder how a nurse had tamed the devil. And that is the story of Kane and Adrian. From the freezing waters of the Hudson to the highest peaks of power, Kane proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is fall in love. If you enjoyed this mafia romance filled with twists, betrayal, and redemption, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have a new story dropping next week about a bodyguard who falls for the senator's daughter, and trust me, you don't want to miss that ending. What did you think of the twist with the stepmother? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.